Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, responds to former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly saying that former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, falls in the general definition of fascist and would govern like a dictator if elected again. Vice President saying the bottom line is this: we know what Donald Trump wants. He wants unchecked power. The question in 13 days will be, what do the American people want? Donald Trump today campaigns in Georgia, including a rally at a church. White House has asked about President Joe Biden's comment Tuesday in New Hampshire, where he first said of Donald Trump, "We've got to lock him up," before changing it to "lock him up politically." Pentagon confirms reports that North Korea has sent military troops to Russia, but Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says it's not clear yet whether those troops are going to fight in the war in Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken holds a news conference in Israel about his meeting with the Prime Minister and other Israeli officials on the war in Gaza and the fighting along the border with Lebanon. And California members of Congress remember Fernando Valenzuela, the star Los Angeles Dodgers pitcher born in Mexico who inspired the Latino community and sparked the nationwide cultural phenomenon known as Fernando Mania. Fernando Valenzuela has died at the age of 63. Story from the Washington Post. Vice President Kamala Harris on Wednesday seized on comments by former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly that Donald Trump meets the definition of a fascist, urging voters to heed warnings from people who have worked with Trump that his beliefs are incredibly dangerous. Kelly, the former president's longest-serving White House Chief of Staff, said in an interview Tuesday that his former boss would govern like a dictator if elected again and does not understand the Constitution or the rule of law. The comments made to the New York Times gave Harris new ammunition less than 2 weeks before Election Day for her long-standing argument that Trump cannot be trusted with the power of the presidency. That was from the Washington Post. John Kelly also made similar comments in an article in The Atlantic on Tuesday. Vice President Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, spoke at the vice president's residence in Washington, D.C.
So yesterday we learned that Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, a retired four-star general, confirmed that while Donald Trump was president, he said he wanted generals like Adolf Hitler had. Donald Trump said that because he does not want a military that is loyal to the United States Constitution. He wants a military that is loyal to him. He wants a military who will be loyal to him personally, one that will obey his orders even when he tells them to break the law or abandon their oath to the Constitution of the United States. In just the past week, Donald Trump has repeatedly called his fellow Americans the enemy from within, and even said that he would use the United States military to go after American citizens. And let's be clear about who he considers to be the enemy from within. Anyone who refuses to bend a knee or dares to criticize him would qualify, in his mind, as the enemy within, like judges, like journalists, like nonpartisan election officials. It is deeply troubling and incredibly dangerous that Donald Trump would invoke Adolf Hitler, the man who is responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews and hundreds of thousands of Americans. All of this is further evidence for the American people of who Donald Trump really is. This is a window into who Donald Trump really is, from the people who know him best, from the people who worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and in the Situation Room. And it is clear from John Kelly's words that Donald Trump is someone who, I quote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, who in fact vowed to be a dictator on day one and vowed to use the military as his personal militia to carry out his personal and political vendettas. Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable. And in a second term, people like John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions. Those who once tried to stop him from pursuing his worst impulses would no longer be there, and no longer be there to rein him in. So the bottom line is this. We know what Donald Trump wants. He wants unchecked power. The question in 13 days will be, what do the American people want? Thank you.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, today at the vice president's residence in Washington, the Naval Observatory. She then traveled to Pennsylvania for a town hall hosted by CNN. Donald Trump campaign spokesman Stephen Chung put out a statement that said John Kelly has totally beclowned himself with these debunked stories he has fabricated because he failed to serve his president well while working as chief of staff and currently suffers from a debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome. The statement goes on. Donald Trump has always honored the service and sacrifice of all our military men and women, whereas Kamala Harris has completely disrespected the families of those who gave the ultimate sacrifice, including the Abbey Gate 13. Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, held a campaign town hall today at Christ Chapel in Zebulon, Georgia. And the title was Believers and Ballots. It was moderated by the Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Burt Jones. Donald Trump did not address the John Kelly comments directly, but during an answer about foreign affairs, he did speak about Hungary's authoritarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban.
Frankly, we're going to take care of everything. We're going to straighten out the world a little bit. One thing, if I could, somebody that a lot of people respect a lot, Viktor Orban from Hungary. So he's the prime minister, and he made the statement. He said, when Trump comes back as president, everything's going to be perfect. And it was for 4 years. And I know exactly what he was talking about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jake.
At another point during this town hall meeting with Donald Trump, he was asked about his closing message to Christian voters.
President Trump, is an honor. First off, please know that me and my family, and I know so many other Christians here in Georgia, are praying for you, praying for your family, and praying that the Lord will deliver you. Amen. Amen. And we're praying that the Lord will deliver you back in the White House very soon. Amen.
Thank you very much.
Just recently, a study came out from Arizona Christian University showing that 32 million Christian Americans will not be going to the polls to vote this year. If you could share a final message to those Christians to encourage them to go to the polls, what would your message be?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Matthew, that if you look over the last 30 years or so, for whatever reason, Christians are not tremendous voters in terms of percentage. If they were, we'd never lose an election. We wouldn't have had these people in office. We would never lose an election. And I think they are. I think we've really energized a lot of people this time because they've seen how bad it is. This last 4 years it's been a horror show, an absolute horror show. And I think we're going to see those numbers go way up. I'm almost sure of it, and I'm even hearing that from statistically because you see what's coming in. And by the way, record numbers of votes are coming in, so that's supposed to be a good thing for us, and we have to make sure. Too big to rig. We want to make it too big to rig, right? Mm-hmm. But if they did, we would literally never lose an election. And, you know, there's persecution going on. And especially, I don't know if you've heard, with Catholics. I don't know what's going on with Catholics. Why are they after Catholics? But the Catholics are being persecuted. School boards are being persecuted. Parents. This group is not a nice group of people. You know, you think they're stupid, and they are really pretty dumb. But when you look at what the policies, what they've done to this country, but they're vicious people. They're vicious, vicious people. And people are being persecuted, people of religion. And you saw it a little bit during COVID, where you'd have a service outside, everybody's 5 yards away and everything, and they're coming and arresting people. It's very bad. But I think you're going to see a big change. I think you're going to see it now. And hopefully we're going to keep it going. You know, without religion, it's like the glue that holds it all together. This would be a different country. The religion and all of it, virtually all of them are going, if you look at a path, wasn't helped by COVID, by the way. When you had COVID, all of a sudden, people started thinking a little bit differently, and they, you know, got used to a different way of life for a long period of time, and maybe it didn't quite come back. But it's going this way. If we ever had it going up, it would, and I think we're going to get it up. I really believe it. I think this election is important for even that reason, for everything. It's so important, but it's such a good question. You know who else are hard voters? Are NRA people, rifles and guns, people that own guns, they vote in a very small proportion. If they ever voted, you could never lose. And in fact, the Democrats, the radical left, used to fear them, and now they don't fear them any longer because they don't vote to the extent that they should. And, look, we're Second Amendment. I think everyone in this room is Second Amendment and Second Amendment people.
Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. And Mr. President, we have had a lot of early votes, over 2 million early votes as of today.
Right.
So
it's a record.
It is a record. It is a record. So
Donald Trump town hall at Christ Chapel in Zebulon, Georgia, joined by the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Burt Jones. For the vice presidential nominees today, Republican J.D. Vance, Ohio Senator, was in Nevada, rallies in Las Vegas and Reno, and Democrat Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, voted early with his family in St. Paul. Story from the New York Times. President Biden said on Tuesday that former President Donald J. Trump was a threat to democracy and should be locked up before quickly amending his comment to say he meant locked up politically. Mr. Biden was speaking at a local Democratic campaign office in Concord, New Hampshire, when he appeared to slip by suggesting he wanted his predecessor put behind bars. While Mr. Trump, as a candidate and president, has regularly used such language about his opponents, Mr. Biden typically refrains from that kind of talk to avoid fueling Republicans' claims that he's prosecuting his adversary. That was the article from the New York Times. This is what President Biden said on Tuesday in New Hampshire.
He is talking about doing away with the entire Department of Education. He's talking, he means it. This is not a joke. This is a guy who also wants to replace every civil servant, every single one. Thinks he has a right under the Supreme Court ruling on immunity to be able to, if need be, if it was the case, to actually physically eliminate, shoot, kill someone who he believes to be the threat to him. I mean, so I know this sounds bizarre. It sounds like if I said this 5 years ago, you'd lock me up. We got to lock him up. Politically lock him up. Lock him out. That's what we have to do.
President Joe Biden Tuesday at a Democratic campaign office in Concord, New Hampshire. A Donald Trump campaign spokeswoman, Caroline Leavitt, putting out a statement. Joe Biden just admitted the truth. He and Kamala's plans all along has been to politically persecute their opponent, President Trump, because they can't beat him fair and square. The Harris-Biden administration is the real threat to democracy. We call on Kamala Harris to condemn Joe Biden's disgraceful remark. That was the statement from the spokeswoman with the Donald Trump campaign. Reporters today asking about this at the White House briefing with Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
Karine, what did the president mean when he said last night about Donald Trump, we got to lock him up?
So look, and the president spoke about this very clearly as well in his statement, and he said he meant lock him out politically, lock him out. That's what he said, and that's what we have to do. That was the part of his quote that he said last night while he was in New Hampshire. Look, let's not forget, this is a president that has never shied away from being very clear and laying down what is at stake in this election. I'm going to be really mindful and not speaking about 2024 election. That's just less than 2 weeks away. But this is just speaking to what the president said last night. He made very clear yesterday that he was referring to defeating Donald Trump. That is what he was talking about. He said politically lock him out. That is what he was referring to.
Well, he first said twice, lock him up. So you're saying when he said lock him up, he meant defeat
Well, it's not
Donald
what
Trump.
I'm saying. It's what he said. He said to the
When he clarified, but he initially said lock him up.
Exactly. He clarified himself. He wanted to make sure that things were put into context. He wanted to make sure that while not just New Hampshire folks that were there were going to see it, but also the Americans who are watching and pay attention to what the president is saying. He wanted to put it into context, and he himself, this is not me, this is the president himself going back to explain to say that he was talking about politically locking him out.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at today's White House news conference. The Times in Great Britain reports more than a quarter of Americans believe that civil war could break out after this year's presidential election, according to polling for The Times. 12% of respondents said they knew someone who might take up arms if they thought Donald Trump was cheated out of victory in under 2 weeks' time. 5% said they knew someone who might do the same if they thought Kamala Harris was cheated. That was the article from The Times in London. Amy Cohen, executive director of the National Association of State Election Directors in the United States, said today at a McCain Institute program in Washington that she has concerns about what happens after Election Day.
I also have been thinking a lot about the post-election period, because I think that for a lot of Americans, we think November 5th, great, the election is over, and maybe we won't have results. Spoiler alert, we won't, because it takes time to tabulate all those ballots. But I think the average person is thinking well, maybe we won't have results, but the election is over. No, election officials have a lot of post-election legal responsibilities to tabulate every eligible ballot to make sure that their results are correct. They do audits, they do recounts, they do recanvasses, they do all kinds of things in the post-election period. And then those results have to be certified both at the local level and then at the state level. And then because we're talking about a presidential election, we're also talking about the Electoral College. And so for me, one of the things that keeps me awake at night is thinking about the post-election period, because that is a completely different information ecosystem, I think, than what is sort of the pre-election period. I think back to 2020, where on election night, I remember saying to Matt, election officials did a great job. This is incredible. What we have been through over the last 8 months is they're going to write books about this. We killed it. I'm so proud. And then woke up the next morning, after 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and was like, what is happening? Because it very quickly shifted from this story of resilience and, election officials are heroes into something completely different. And so for me, the post-election period, it makes me really nervous. And so, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I have a microphone and an audience right now to say, we are not going to have results on election night. And that is normal. We have never had election results on election night. It has always been that results take time to be tabulated. Every eligible ballot needs to be tabulated and counted. And those dates and deadlines are different in every state. And that's their state law. Election officials don't make state law. They follow state law. And so election officials are going to do everything they are obligated to do under their state law, and also meet their federal electoral college responsibilities as well. But we need to be understanding that and talking about that now, because it's normal and it has always been the case. What has changed is America's political composition, so races are getting tighter, and election officials don't call races. We just tabulate ballots. And so we need to be talking about this now, loudly and everywhere we can, because the post-election period is going to be sort of information overload, and it's going to be very chaotic.
Amy Cohen, executive director of the National Association of State Election Directors, on a panel at today's event on democracy and misinformation hosted by the McCain Institute in Washington, D.C. This is Washington Today. C-SPAN this morning continued its look at the 7 presidential election battleground states, and today focusing on Wisconsin. Scott Bauer is the Associated Press State House reporter in that state.
4 of the last 6 presidential races have been decided by less than 1 percentage point in Wisconsin. Why is it such a battleground state?
It's kind of a microcosm of America, really. We have 2 very large urban areas in Milwaukee and Madison that are overwhelmingly Democratic. We have a lot of rural areas that are overwhelmingly Republican. And then there are some swing communities, some smaller communities that are a little more purple. So you really have a lot of the same elements you see nationwide playing out in a one state. And so not just those presidential elections have been very close, but many of our other statewide races for governor and other offices have also been decided by very small margins over the past 20 plus years.
And it was in 2016 that former President Trump became the first Republican to win in Wisconsin. Has it been trending Republican since then?
Not since, well, it's hard to say since 2016, but Democrats have had 14, I believe, out of the last 17 statewide races they have won. So the Democrats feel like they're on a roll. Certainly since the Dobbs Supreme Court decision, Democrats have done very well in statewide races. But this year we are still seeing very close races for the presidency. We have a U.S. Senate race that's up, a Democratic incumbent who's running. Polls and both campaigns have been saying that they believe both of those races are extremely close. So Democrats feel like they have some momentum, but they are certainly not feeling like they're taking anything for granted.
So, Scott, who are the undecided voters? How many, if you can gauge this, how many undecided voters are there in Wisconsin, and what's their demographic?
Yeah, there's always a very, very small sliver of people who say they're undecided, that polls catch as undecided. I would, hazard a guess, or the polls have shown that it's a very small number, 1% to 2%, somewhere in that range. I would say these people, in my experience, are, perhaps people who have supported President Trump in the past and now don't know if they want to do that again, but they're not completely sold on Kamala Harris. So you have that demographic. You also have people who, believe it or not, for C-SPAN viewers, don't pay close attention to politics year round, aren't following the day-to-day hustle and bustle of the campaigns, and only start to tune in right toward the end. And these may be people who, haven't voted before or just haven't been that engaged. And so both sides are obviously spending a lot of time in Wisconsin, a lot of money in Wisconsin, trying to engage with those low propensity voters and those folks who are, who are perhaps waffling on President Trump, but are also not completely sold yet on Kamala Harris.
Scott Bauer is Associated Press State House reporter in Wisconsin, joining C-SPAN on this morning's Washington Journal program. We are looking at the 7 battleground states this week, 1 per day. Sunday was Michigan, Monday, Georgia, Tuesday, Arizona, today, Wisconsin. Thursday will be Nevada, Friday, Pennsylvania, and Saturday, North Carolina. Washington Journal is live every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN radio and television. Story from CNN. The Justice Department warned Elon Musk's America PAC in recent days that his $1 million sweepstakes to registered voters in swing states may violate federal law. People briefed on the matter told CNN. Musk, who has thrown his support behind former President Donald Trump and is spending millions of dollars supporting his candidacy, has publicized the $1 million prize by his Political Action Committee aiming to increase voter registrations in hotly contested states. That was from CNN. From AP, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has rejected a claim by Donald Trump's campaign that his Labour Party is illegally interfering in the U.S. presidential election. A statement on Trump's website on Tuesday night said an official complaint had been filed with the Federal Election Commission against the Labour Party and the campaign of Vice President Kamala Harris, alleging illegal foreign campaign contributions and interference in our elections. The complaint referred to media reports about meetings between Labour and Democrat officials and a now-deleted LinkedIn post in which a Labour staffer said there were nearly 100 Labour Party staff, current and former, going to the U.S. in the next few weeks to swing states. Labour said it is common practice for campaigners of all political persuasions from around the world to volunteer in U.S. elections. The party said in a statement that where Labour activists take part, they do so at their own expense. That was reporting from Associated Press. This came up today during Prime Minister's Question Time in the British House of Commons in London. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, is filling in for the Prime Minister who's out of the country. Here, questioned by Scottish National Party leader Stephen Flynn.
Stephen Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In today's spirit of cross-party working, will the Deputy Prime Minister join me and applauding the brave Labour staff members who've travelled across the Atlantic to campaign against Donald Trump.
Mr. Speaker, I'm loving this loving. I don't often get it. But I say to the honourable gentleman is that people in their own time often go and campaign, and that's what we've seen. It happens in all political parties. People go and campaign, and they do what they want to do in their own time with their own money.
The British Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner of the Labour Party during Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons in London today. A BBC News article does have this line: foreign nationals are permitted to serve as campaign volunteers as long as they are not compensated, according to Federal Election Commission rules. C-SPAN has been covering U.S. Senate and House races and governor's races as well during this campaign season, especially the ones where polls indicate they're very close. Article from the Des Moines Register: in a televised debate Monday night, Iowa's 1st congressional district candidate sparred over abortion restrictions but found some agreement on Israel's right to defend itself in the wake of last year's attack by Hamas militants. Democrat Christina Bohannon and incumbent Republican Congresswoman Mariannette Miller Meeks are once again facing off after Bohannon failed to unseat Miller Meeks in 2022. Miller Meeks narrowly eked out a victory in 2020, winning by 6 votes against Democrat Rita Hart, then beat Bohannon 2 years later by nearly 7 percentage points. Article also says Democratic and Republican groups have poured millions of dollars into the matchup, whose outcome will help decide which party controls Congress. And the nonpartisan elections analyst with the Cook Political Report recently moved the 1st district from lean Republican into its most competitive toss-up category. That was the Des Moines Register. Here's part of that debate where the two candidates talked about tax policy.
The Trump-era tax cuts, they will expire at the end of next year if Congress doesn't take action. Starting with Christina Bohannon, is there any part of those tax cuts that you would vote to keep?
What we need to do, look, that was in 2017. That was 7 years ago. A lot has happened. COVID has, largely changed, our economy and a lot about our economy. So we need to look holistically, at our tax system. And what we need to make sure is that, it is working for the middle class. My opponent has supported tax cuts for the ultra wealthy, for billionaire donors, for corporations, and I think that we need to have a tax system that has everybody pay their fair share. And I would never support raising taxes on the middle class. I think we need a middle class tax cut. And I have thought that for a long time. Representative Miller Meeks has talked about the child tax credit quite a few times already tonight. I'm glad that she is on board with that now, because the fact is that she let the child tax credit expire. That is $1,800 per child, per family. And that expired because Representative Miller Meeks did not vote for it to extend it. So I think that that's a real problem. I want to see a middle class tax cut, and I want to see that child tax credit expanded.
All right, so do you have no specifics on the tax cut? You're saying middle class, what does that mean? Is there a threshold there? You're talking $400,000 like Biden has talked about. What are you pushing?
I think that's a fair number. I think that's a fair number. I mean, I think that we can talk about it. We can negotiate. And I'm open to that. But whatever it is, it needs to work for working people. We have a tax system right now where it is well documented that there are many billionaires in this country that pay zero tax or less than 1%. That is not fair. Working people are bearing the brunt of an economy where that's happening. So I will never support raising middle class taxes, and I want to see a middle class tax cut.
All right, Mariannette Miller Meeks, the Congressional Budget Office.
Can I respond?
Yeah, I'm going to work this in there. Give me 1 second. Give me 10 seconds. Said that if you add the Trump tax cuts along with the COVID aid that he did, it added $8.4 trillion to the national debt. So the question is, you've talked about extending the Trump tax cuts. How much are you willing to raise the debt to extend tax cuts?
Well, first of all, the Biden-Harris administration already raised taxes on those individuals making under $400,000 a year. They did that by their spending packages, 1.9 trillion by March of 2021, which caused inflation. Inflation was under 2% in December of 2023. I've heard and read numbers of 1.6%, December of 2020. By May of 2021, inflation was at 5.6%. And by 2022, inflation was at 9%. That is a tax cut that is insidious, or tax increase that is insidious, and it's regressive, and that's inflation. And that was under people making $400,000 a year. So low-income families, working poor, senior citizens on a fixed income all saw their burden through inflation go up with high prices. That's the legacy that you all have. You've already created a problem scenario where the Biden-Harris administration policies. You just said that you would agree with President Biden, and President Biden already raised
raising the taxes
on individuals by their spending policies, which caused record amounts of inflation where people are struggling.
A couple things here, right?
They're both the same thing.
Let's do
economists
just the tax
consider that inflation is an insidious regressive tax, so it's a tax.
All right.
Monday night's debate between Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks, Republican of Iowa, and Democratic challenger Christina Bohannon, who is a law professor, former engineer, and former state representative. This is for Iowa's 1st congressional district. Again, the Cook Political Report rates it as a toss-up election, one of the few dozen House races across the country that are too close to call, according to the polls, and whose results will decide which party controls the U.S. House in January. You can find all of C-SPAN's Campaign 2024 coverage archived at our website at cspan.org. Washington Today continues in a moment.
This election night, C-SPAN delivers something different. Not just the presidential race, but the state races that will decide the balance of power in Congress. No political pundits, no spin, no commercials. Just the candidates, the results, and you. Follow C-SPAN this election night, Tuesday, November 5th, on TV, online, or on the free C-SPAN Now video app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. From AP, Ukraine will receive $50 billion in loans backed by frozen Russian assets from Group of 7 allies, the White House said Wednesday. Distribution of the money will begin by year's end, according to American officials who said the United States is providing $20 billion of the total. Leaders of the wealthy democracies agreed earlier this year to engineer the mammoth loan to help Ukraine in its fight for survival after Russia's invasion. Interest earned on profits from Russia's frozen central bank assets will be used as collateral. That was from Associated Press. President Biden putting out a statement saying that this means, quote, Ukraine can receive the assistance it needs now without burdening taxpayers. And John Kirby, the White House National Security Communications Advisor, talked about it during the White House briefing.
The Ukrainian military continues to fight bravely and effectively, and President Biden is determined to provide Ukraine with the support that it needs to prevail. To that end, the president announced today that of the $50 billion that the G7 committed to loan Ukraine back in June, the United States will provide a loan of $20 billion. The other $30 billion in loans will come from a combination of our G7 partners, including the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Japan. Now, this is unique. Never before has a multilateral coalition frozen the assets of an aggressor country and then harnessed the value of those assets to fund the defense of the aggrieved party, all while respecting the rule of law and maintaining solidarity. These loans will support the people of Ukraine as they defend and rebuild their country. And it's another example of how Mr. Putin's war of aggression has only unified and strengthened the resolve of G7 countries and our partners to defend shared values.
John Kirby, White House National Security Communications Advisor, opening up today's White House news conference. NBC News writes an article, North Korea has sent troops to Russia, the United States said Wednesday, in its first public confirmation of a move that has rattled Western allies and could mark a major escalation of Moscow's war in Ukraine. There is evidence of DPRK troops in Russia, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told reporters in Rome, using the abbreviation for North Korea's formal name, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That was from NBC News. Secretary Austin spoke to reporters in Rome after meeting the Pope at the Vatican.
Mr. Secretary, In his nightly video address last night, Ukraine's President Zelensky called on allies not to hide and to respond to evidence of North Korean involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine. So I'll ask you, have you seen any evidence that North Korean troops are in Russia? And if so, what is the intent of this deployment?
Well, our analysts they continue to look at this. Now, we are seeing evidence that there are North Korean troops that have gone to Africa. Now, what not Africa, but Russia. What exactly they're doing, left to be seen. These are things that we need to sort out. We'll have more for you on that later. But yeah, as we continue to look at this, there is evidence that there are DPRK troops, in Russia. So.
Eric. Just to follow up on that, sir, can you talk a little bit about what you understand the intent of those troops to be, and what does it say about perhaps the desperation of Putin that he's had to rely on these kind of troops? What role is that, and what is North Korea getting in return for that? What's the quid pro quo from that?
All things that we're trying to gain better fidelity on, Eric. Number one, why are the troops there? We'll continue to pull this thread and see what happens here. If they're co-belligerents, their intention is to participate in this war on Russia's behalf, that is a very, very serious issue, and it will have impacts not only in Europe. It will also impact things in the Indo-Pacific as well. We've seen South Korea, or the Republic of Korea, be very focused on this issue as well. So still a lot of answers, a lot of things to be answered, Eric, and our analysts will continue to work this, and we'll have more for you as we get more fidelity here.
What are the North Koreans about this? Why are they doing
this? Unknown. Certainly, there is a strengthened relationship, for lack of a better term, between Russia and DPRK. You've seen DPRK provide arms and munitions to Russia, and this is a next step. But what it means in terms of where Putin is, you've heard me talk about the significant casualties that he has experienced over the last 2.5 years. This is an indication that he may be even in more trouble than most people realize. But again, he went tin cupping early on to get additional weapons and materials from DPRK and then from Iran. And now he's making a move to get more people, if that is the case. If these troops are designed to be a part of the fight in Ukraine. But we'll see. These are questions yet to be answered.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin taking reporters' questions in Rome, Italy. Story from The Hill. House Intelligence Committee Chair Mike Turner, Republican of Ohio, on Wednesday said the U.S. should consider taking direct military action if North Korean troops enter the war in Ukraine following the revelation that thousands of soldiers from the isolated country are in Russia. That was from The Hill. And John Kirby, the White House National Security spokesperson, telling reporters at today's White House briefing that if North Korean troops are used in the war against Ukraine, quote, they will become legitimate military targets. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, writes USA Today, rolled his foundering plea for peace into Saudi Arabia on Wednesday amid intensified fighting in the region that saw his own entourage compelled to take shelter in its Israeli hotel amid a Hezbollah rocket attack. Israel's Air Force said it shot down 2 rockets from Lebanon that set off air raid sirens in Tel Aviv while Blinken was completing a visit to the city. That was from USA Today. Before leaving Tel Aviv, Secretary Blinken spoke to reporters at the airport about his meetings during this trip with the Israeli Prime Minister and other Israeli leaders.
Since October 7th a year ago, Israel has achieved most of its strategic objectives when it comes to Gaza, all with the idea of making sure that October 7th could never happen again. In the space of a year, it's managed to dismantle Hamas's military capacity. It's destroyed much of its arsenal. It's eliminated its senior leadership, including, most recently, Yahya Sinwar. this has come at the cost, great cost, to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Now is the time to turn those successes into an enduring strategic success. And there are really two things left to do. Get the hostages home and bring the war to an end with an understanding of what will follow. And that's what we've been working on this past day and will continue to work on throughout this trip.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking to reporters at the airport in Tel Aviv, Israel. Returning to the USA Today article, the Gaza Health Ministry, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization said they would be unable to start a polio vaccination campaign in northern Gaza as planned because of the intense bombardments, mass displacements, and lack of access. A first round of vaccinations was conducted across Gaza early last month. A delay in administering a second dose reduces the impact of the effort, health officials said. That's reporting from USA Today. Returning to the Secretary Blinken news conference, Andrea Mitchell, NBC News chief Washington correspondent and chief foreign affairs correspondent, asked the Secretary about northern Gaza and aid.
You said that there has been progress. I want to ask you about the humanitarian crisis in North Gaza. Independent experts like Cindy McCain of the World Food Program say it is a disaster, that children are malnourished with lifelong health effects, those who are not already starving. The population is being decimated. The attacks continue, contrary to what you said about Israel having accomplished its initial goals. And according to these experts, Israel is blocking aid from getting in with unreasonable searches at the border and other obstacles so that the food is not getting to the people who desperately need it. You said there's been progress. What evidence do you have of that? And what more still needs to be done?
So, Andrea, this is exactly why we're so intensely focused on this issue. It's why Secretary Austin and I wrote to our counterparts here in Israel. It's why we insisted that they take concrete, specific actions to improve the situation, to enable food not only to get to Gaza, and there are trucks getting to Gaza. A big part of the challenge is once they're there, it's moving them around within Gaza. There are a lot of challenges that go along with that, including lawlessness, including looting, but Israel has to maximize everything it has under its control in order to get the food in. Since that letter, yes, we've seen progress, but it's not enough. We've seen progress in the opening of the Erez crossing. We've seen progress in the reanimation of the Jordanian corridor. We've seen progress in the opening of a fifth crossing point and other steps that are being taken. We have a list of things that we're going through one by one, systematically, with our Israeli counterparts to make sure that they follow through. And we told them very clearly in the letter that we expected these steps to be taken within 30 days, but starting immediately. They have started, and we're tracking this, as I say, every single day. We have senior officials from the department whose job is to focus on that every day. That's exactly what they're doing. The measure, though, is are people getting what they need? That's what we're looking at, and it has to be done in a sustained way. Back in April, I wrote a similar letter, and at that point, the letter didn't become public. This one did, but we saw the improvements in April, and then we saw it go on a downward trajectory again. That's what caused Secretary Austin and I to write again. That's what's causing us right now to have this intense focus, even as we're trying to get to an end of conflict in Gaza, bring the hostages home, even as we're dealing with Lebanon, even as we're dealing with Iran.
I mean, in April you warned them. Why wasn't that warning enough once they backslid?
Because we saw them take action, we saw concrete improvements, and then as we saw it abate again.
Is it an empty threat to withhold the weapons as is congressionally mandated?
I am determined to follow the law. I will follow the law.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking with Andrea Mitchell from NBC News at the airport in Tel Aviv, Israel, before he flew to Saudi Arabia. This is his 11th trip to the Middle East since the Hamas attack on Israel October 7th of last year. U.S. Congressman Greg Murphy, Republican of North Carolina, posting today on X, today marks the 41st anniversary of the Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, Lebanon, which took the lives of 241 service members, the majority of whom were based out of Camp Lejeune. We remember those who gave their lives in service and pray for the families who lost loved ones. The White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. today talking about international economic policy. Emily G., Senior Vice President at the Center for American Progress, writing about it on X. Takeaway from Jake Sullivan at Brookings: targeted strategic use of tariffs, export controls, and other trade tools is part of a positive-sum approach to trade and complementary to robust domestic investment. She also posted, "Are we walking away from trade as a pillar of U.S. policy?" Jake Sullivan of Brookings says no and calls for greater integration of goals on climate, worker protection, and supply chain resilience into trade policy. Here's part of the discussion. Jake Sullivan questioned by David Wessel of Brookings.
You mentioned at one point trade-offs, and you did mention the word consumers once. But there are costs to this. In order to have a more resilient supply chains, in order to have stronger national security, in order to maintain a technological lead over China, you are asking the American people to pay a cost. We will pay more for EVs. We will pay more for solar energy. We will lose some of the benefits that we get from the competition that comes from globalization. How do you weigh those costs? How do you weigh those trade-offs when you're deciding which policies to pursue?
Well, first of all, any policy of any kind involves trade-offs because you can't just go to a corner solution. A corner solution would be, don't worry at all about national security. Corner solution would be, don't worry at all about consumers. We don't believe in that. We believe in worrying about both, and therefore, inherently, you're producing trade-offs. The sanity of a policy actually rests in the fact that it is grappling with trade-offs and tensions. And pointing that out is not an argument, well, let's just keep doing what we were doing before. That's kind of one of the points I was making in the speech. Now, as I also said, we believe that just broad-based indiscriminate tariffs do harm consumers. They harm businesses, they harm productivity, and we aren't for those. So the way we think about it is, where are the strategic sectors where actually revitalizing American manufacturing and innovation capacity will have long-term benefits that go beyond just the growth of those industries, but will deliver actual benefits to actual communities and actual humans across the United States. And that's what's behind the IRA. That's behind the targeted steps we took on the 301 tariffs earlier this year. And that's behind the kind of approach that we are trying to put forward. It is fundamentally with the American worker, working family, middle-class family in mind that we are trying to take these steps. And that family cares about affordability, they care about their security and safety, they care about having good-paying jobs and vibrant communities, and they care also about going through an effective clean energy transition and meeting the moment on the climate crisis. To do all of that means trying to design a policy that can be honest and transparent about the approach and the trade-offs, and then try to balance them effectively in a way that delivers on the kind of ambition that I've laid out in this speech.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, questioned by David Wessel, Brookings Institution's Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy Director at Brookings today in Washington. On Wall Street, the Dow down 409, NASDAQ down 296, S&P down 53. Tributes are coming in for Fernando Valenzuela, former Major League Baseball pitcher from 1981 through 1997, who died at the age of 63. An NBC News Los Angeles article reads, Valenzuela, who was nicknamed El Toro, the Bull, by his fans, drew countless Mexican-American fans to Dodger games, sparking a craze known as Fernando mania. Congressman Jimmy Gomez of California, writing on X, Fernando Valenzuela was a true icon of the Dodgers and the game. His legacy and connection with the Latino community in LA is one of the reasons I fell in love with the Dodgers. My condolences to his family and to Dodgers fans everywhere. Fernando Mania Forever, number 34. C-SPAN's American History TV explored Fernando Valenzuela's legacy in 2011 at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, a Mexican-American cultural center in downtown Los Angeles. An exhibit titled LA Starts Here about the founding of LA and the history of Mexicans in Southern California. Ken Luftig Visti is the exhibit curator.
Kind of an exhibition about the story of Los Angeles without talking about Fernando Valenzuela and Fernando Mania. Valenzuela, he was born in Mexico, he played in the Mexican leagues. He came up here and actually played in the 1980 season a little bit, but his real rookie season becomes known as '81. And he really has this magical impact, not just as a baseball player for his accomplishments, which were very striking. And you see a great quote here from Jaime Jarrín, he's been the Dodgers Spanish language announcer since the late 50s. That's when Fernando pitched, it wasn't a sporting event, it was a social event. All of a sudden, people wanted to learn Spanish and learn about Mexico. It was a wonderful way to bring two countries together. And you can read into that what he means is that prior to him showing up, that wasn't something that was really going on the mass level. Baseball and that heritage community with the Dodgers did not necessarily feel like they were part of a single city. Fernando comes in and he's one person that almost symbolically bridges that. And there's no way saying that it's all perfect or anything like that, but he's a powerful figure in that regard, and the charisma that he brought out to the mound and he continues to bring to the city here, to all communities, is very significant. Plus, people just love seeing the jersey and the material and remembering what it was like to see Fernando.
Ken Luftig-Visti is exhibit curator at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes during C-SPAN's American History TV visit in 2011. The exhibit on the history of Mexicans in Southern California. Fernando Valenzuela has passed away at the age of 63. Senator Alex Padilla of California posting on X, deeply saddened to hear of the passing of Fernando Valenzuela. You can't tell the story of Dodgers baseball without Fernando mania. El Toro was a hero to our community on and off the mound, and he leaves behind an indelible legacy. My thoughts are with his family during this time. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter word for word, and we'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.